Why do you argue with me about these things, Dre? That would be like
Well,
me arguing with you about like computer shit. I would never fucking do that.
but
You know more about chess, but I know more about Saved by the Bell.
they switch.
Are you sure? Are you 100% sure they switch, Dre?
I would say 70% willing to put money on it, $20 each or whatever. Welcome to Nerd Fight, or as Jeff suggested, Nerd on Nerd Crime. This is a look back at the Nerd podcast. If this happens to be your first episode, Nerd is a monthly podcast that I'm Dre Alvarez, found most places on the internet as Nerd Numbers, and Jeff May, found most places on the internet as at Hey There Jeffro, that's spelled Jeffro. Our general shtick is that we'll do a trilogy of episodes around a random topic. And random is that I usually have something singular that I want to do a podcast on, and then we build around it. And that really started out because Jeff over at patreon.com/Jeff May put up the option to produce your own podcast. This could be a one-off. So I did plan to do one episode and then it just grew. That was over 2 years ago, and we've done over 30 episodes since. So, as an example, the very first episode of Nerd was on Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which was arguably my favorite game as a child. And around that, we built up the theme of vintage Nintendo games, finishing up with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Jeff's favorite game, and Mega Man 2, which now I feel bad to do this, my second favorite game as a kid, I have to say, because I just called, Zelda 2 my favorite, which I'd keep that going. All right. Now, not shockingly, Jeff and I are both big nerds and we disagree from time to time. And this is actually something I've been meaning to do for a while, which is to clip together some of the places we've disagreed. Now, for this show, by the way, most of those disagreements are going to be us arguing over who is correct in our memory of a form of pop culture. But I also do sprinkle in a few opinion-based ones you'll get to hear. Now, I've been planning to just clip out the parts of the show where we disagree and do that. And this month actually seemed like a fun time to actually do just a full episode of this. Now, for children of the 80s, you may recognize this gimmick as a clip show, which is the ugly stepchild to the bottle episode in terms of weekly shows and limiting either actor or set usage. And by the way, a future Dre and Jeff write down amazing clip shows from our childhood that we could potentially use. And by the way, we can even go back to the well and use WMAC Masters. And just for the record, that's fair. For new listeners to Nerd, something that I really do enjoy doing is peeking behind the curtains of both pop culture and actually the creative process of the Nerd show. In that vein, I'm recording this January 12th, 2025. And for those who don't know or in the future have forgotten, a lot of California is just on fire, including areas right by where Jeff lives. And then also Jeff got injured while at boxing practice. So yeah, 2025 thus far has decided to be Mike Tyson in the first minute and 30 of round one at Jeff. And that has just made scheduling and doing everything podcast related a little difficult this week. But the Nerd show we like going the third Thursday of every month. And I really want to keep that going. So to be a really good friend to Jeff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a bunch of clips of us arguing, and then as the host, present them from my point of view without Jeff around. I may be a villain. All right, anyway, that's obviously a joke. Joking aside, it was just going to be tough to record a new episode. I am really excited about the upcoming season of Nerd, which is going to be comic themed, as in read comic books. For the typical episode of Nerd, we'll record for 90 minutes, to some cases over 2 hours to get an episode. And one of the most awesome parts about that is we'll release the episode and fans of the show, or sometimes even Jeff and myself, will go, wait, why didn't we talk about this? Or we forgot this. And to me, that is just awesome. That shows what a good show is. So this is very much following that along, saying 2 years of shows, and I have various episodes where I still have things to add or disputes to resolve. Another point, if you are a big fan of Jeff and still want to hear him new this week, if you go over to youtube.com at Jeff Has Cool Cards, Jeff opens packs of trading cards every Wednesday. That is usually around 1 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Central. And I open cards every Monday night. I am still planning to do that tomorrow night. That is usually around 8:45 p.m. Central, 6:45 Pacific. And as I also mentioned, you can head over to patreon.com/Jeff May if you want some of those cards from Jeff sent to you in the mail and to help us keep doing stuff like this. Before I actually get into the arguments that Jeff and I have had over the years, I did actually figure that this is a clip episode is a good excuse to actually just do like a recap of all the seasons of Nerds and give you even more behind the scenes looks. You can call this a clip episode. You can call this bonus features. Jeff and I, when we were kind of bandying back and forth, were joking about like the term like director's commentary, whichever floats your boat. Let's get going. So season 1, as I already mentioned, was a vintage Nintendo games, and that spawned from Zelda 2. Season 2, we ended up doing television specials, and it was me wanting to do He-Man and She-Ra Christmas special. I'd had this DVD for years from a friend. I'd got it as a white elephant gift, and I had never watched it, and I finally wanted to. Jeff countered with a Muppet Family Christmas. I would argue one of the best Christmas specials ever. And we had the fans vote, but then we wound up doing both for the season. And we ended with Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, the made-for-television Ewok movie that came out right after Return of the Jedi. And man, between Jeff and I definitely chose Meter. Season 3, we hopped to collectible card games. And from the very first episode of Nerd, we knew we were going to do Decipher's Star Wars customizable card game, a huge part of Jeff and my childhood. And then we followed that straight up the line with Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. And that's where we actually started adding guests to the show. We had the fantastic Elise Golgowski and Brian Foster, who's been my co-host on the Box Score Geek show for years. That was a lot of fun. Season 4, we went into batshit sequels. This was a movie-themed trilogy. And what actually started is I had kind of thought about doing like an Ernie Reyes Jr. angle and had suggested Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle 2, Secret of the Ooze. And we kind of pivoted away from that and went with sequels. And Jeff has mentioned for years just how much he loves Gremlins 2, so that was an easy follow-up. And I was struggling with a third one. And Kim Krall, who is Jeff's co-host on the Ugh Fine We Have a Podcast show, actually was just randomly talking American Tail on one of her podcasts, and that kind of solved the puzzle for me. So we did the batshit sequels, and something that I enjoy doing with our themes is I go even more in depth. So the top level, the 10,000-foot view is batshit sequels, and I expanded that to batshit sequels to good movies that went in a completely different direction. Those being, we started with Gremlins 2, we followed it up with An American Tail, 5 Goes West, with guest star Kim Krall. She inspired the episode, so I wanted her on. And then we did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze, and my brother Dan Alvarez was nice enough to be a guest on that, in large part because he helped inspire it, so there's that. With season 5, we went with Parental Neglect, and this one is really funny because I had wanted to do Just Searching for Bobby Fischer, a movie about chess and the chess prodigy Josh Waitzkin, the top junior player in the 1980s in the United States. Many of you may not have heard of it because it is bombed. And I actually said, hey, we could do like childhood prodigies. There were a couple other movies we may or may not do for future seasons. I don't want to spoil them. And Jeff wasn't on board. But then we had producer Bimmy and Jimmy out fighting crime to the rescue because he wondered if there was space at some point to do a podcast episode of Nerd on adventures in babysitting. Jeff actually has like direct connections to the stars of that movie. And both Jimmy and Jeff had seen this recorded on VHS as kids. So that was perfect. And then we got our angle of parental neglect. We decided to follow that up with Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. That was, just a really strong show, but we wound up with kind of 2 bonus episodes because first, Jeff had kind of said that the movie Dutch with Ethan Embry and Ed O'Neill was just one of his favorite Thanksgiving movies. And randomly, Ethan Embry retweeted something Jeff had said about Dutch being the only true Thanksgiving movie. And I was like, well, we got to do it. So we wound up doing Dutch, which followed the parental neglect as well, and something we had decided to start doing with He-Man and She-Ra way back in season 1 and kept going this year, was to do bonus episodes for Christmas. And so we decided on Iron Man 3 because it was a Christmas movie. Also fit with parental neglect, Adam Todd Brown, who you can find over on the You Don't Even Like This network of podcasts where Jeff routinely shows up, has a show called Listcast, and he had a listcast on episodes of Christmas movies and agrees Iron Man 3, a Christmas movie. So we kind of had 2 season 5s where we had our original, which would be Searching for Bobby Fischer, Adventures in Babysitting, and Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. We kind of had a sideways series where you could swap into episodes of Dutch, and Iron Man 3. All right, season 6, we decided to go with video game adaptations, and you can thank John Ryman of the Screenplay podcast over at Gamefully Unemployed. So Tom Ryman and John Ryman do the Screenplay podcast. Currently, Logan Trent is filling in for Tom. And hopefully John won't be offended by this, but I think it's fair to say that myself and John are like the sidekicks to Tom and Jeff. And of course, Tom and Jeff do the Tom and Jeff Watch Batman. So John's like, could we do a crossover? I said, let's do a Screenplay Nerd crossover. And my original suggestion was Super Solvers, which was an educational, I'll put in hard quotes, horror game to teach reading and math I remembered from a kid. That suggestion didn't go over super well, but Jeff said, how about we do video games turned into movies? And of course, Doom counts as a horror movie. I do also really want to highlight that Tom Ryman on the show did a great series of articles over at 1-900-HOT on the novelization of the Doom video games. And that may have actually helped the script of the movie. And there is also a Best Bad Movie Ever. You can find that wherever podcasts are found with the fantastic Abe Epperson. And I think that's just great supplementary material to our episode of Doom. It was a lot of fun talking about Doom. Let's move on to season 7. We'd been doing movies for a bit, so we decided to take a break. This one was really easy. We decided to go with toys, and I had wanted Adam Todd Brown on as a guest, and over the years, he has discussed multiple great stories about G.I. Joe. And so we decided to go with toy lines that have been rebooted, because for those that don't know, in the 1980s, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, is actually a reboot. So we started with that. Then we just went straight to the middle with Star Wars Power of the Force. That's the reboot in the 1990s. And He-Man, the 2000 X reboot. And we had Adam Todd Brown as a guest. And then Jeff said, hey, do we want to do guests for all the shows? I said yes. And then Jeff just pulled out all the stops. He got Ken Knapsack, who wrote the damn book on Why We Love Star Wars. The book's called Why We Love Star Wars. And David Igo, who was a toy designer who had worked over at Tweeterhead as well as Sideshow Collectibles, designing He-Man toys, and now has his own toy line called Monstores coming out, where he worked with their Jeff Cool friend Eric Barnes to make that. And I did sign up for the Patreon, and I do hope I have that coming in the mail in the near future. So an amazing episode on toys. Season 8 was Unfortunate Martial Arts Property. This one's a lot of fun. Logan Trent, I want to say in a Gamefully Employed movie night, had brought up there was a book called Quest for the Dragon Star, An Oral History of WMAC Masters. That is by Chris Landis, a guest I'm still hoping to get on the show one of these days. I want to read this book. I want to revisit the show. And I wanted Logan as a guest because I know he loves WMAC Masters as much as, by the way, I'll keep shouting this out, patreon.com/Jeff May. You know, hey, if anybody ever wants to sponsor WMAC Masters like full season or something, let us know. It'd be fun. That was the start of the season. And we didn't quite know where to go, but we eventually settled on Unfortunate Martial Arts Properties. Jeff had a great follow-up, which was Star Wars Masters of Terrascasi, one of the worst fighting games ever made and tragic in many ways. Go listen to that episode. It's a lot of fun because he enjoyed that from his childhood. And then we rounded it out with Surf Ninjas, going back to the Ernie Reyes Jr. well from way back when we were doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. I really wanted to do Surf Ninjas, but for those that don't know, Jeff is actually friends with Nick Cowan, who plays Adam the Game Gear Psychic in the movie. If you go listen to Jeff Has Cool Friends, there's an amazing episode with Nick on that. And we basically said, hey, it wouldn't be right to podcast on this without clearing it with Nick. Basically saying, we're going to do Unfortunate Martial Arts Properties. We know someone in the movie. We don't really want to be mean to them. And so Jeff not only cleared it by Nick, Nick agreed to be a guest on the show. We got so much cool, amazing behind the scenes stuff. And Nick also gave me a way too good deal. Nick, if you're listening to this episode, you gave me way too good of a deal on Surf Ninjas custom stickers. You can go look for Nick Cowan on Instagram, and then he also runs the unofficial Surf Ninjas shop, where he does sell some amazing Surf Ninja stickers. And those did actually go out to patrons at the right level. So again, patreon.com/Jeff May. You can get lots of cool stuff. All right, we're almost there. The last one, Holiday Ghouls, Supernatural Creatures. Again, this was one that started way back from the get. Early on, we had thought about maybe doing cereal mascots, and one of the most famous sets of cereal mascots is the Monster cereal ones, Count Chocula, Frankenberry, Boo Berry, etc. And we got around to the holiday season. Hey, this would be a good Halloween episode. And then we were able to follow it up with a Thanksgiving episode on 1990 Survivor Series. And the reason this came to mind so easily is it was the Undertaker's debut, as well as the Gobbledygooker, It was explicitly Thanksgiving themed by WWF at the time. And Jeff was there. He said this before on podcasts. So I wanted to, and I also wanted David Bell as a guest. You know, you can see I've just wanted various podcasters I love on the Nerd Show as guests. And Dave was one of the people on the list. And he happens to be from the New England area as well. And I said, hey, I want to get another New Englander on the show. And if you listen to that episode, by the way, super duper quickly, Jeff and Dave do start talking traffic, etc. So I got everything I wanted. And then, of course, Dave had done a series of podcasts on WWE pay-per-views, thanks to the amazing Norm from Cheers. And so I said, I've heard Dave do amazing podcasts before on wrestling. I love his takes. I love that he's from Massachusetts. Would he do this? He did. And we kept our supernatural theme going with The Undertaker as well as Thanksgiving. And finally, we were having trouble kind of picking the last one. Jeff somehow in his back pocket had the underrated musical Anna and the Apocalypse, which is a zombie Christmas musical. That is a thing. And it just fit our theme so well. As mentioned, we've done bonus episodes every Christmas. We kept that going. And I suggested, because I am a horrible person, X-Men, the animated series, the Christmas episode, and we did it. I've mentioned bonuses a few times. We did also have one spacer. We did an episode on the original Bed. We did an episode on the Tick, the comic series, the original Ben Edlund run of 13 comics. We released it for free, but this was a spacer early in the day between season 2 and 3 while we were deciding what to do for season 3. All right, so we are actually going to get into the disagreements Jeff and I have had over the years. To stress, we've had 31 episodes of Nerd. So these are only the ones that I remember, which will come up in a bit, but they're a lot of fun. And if you can think of any other good ones, go ahead and put them in the comments, either at YouTube, over at patreon.com/Jeff May. You can tag Jeff and myself on Instagram, Blue Sky, etc. So disagreement number 1 actually comes from episode 1, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. There are 2 disagreements here. The first is one I actually brought to the table, which is magic doors. And the second one is, do you need to rescue Zelda? So as a note, by the way, and just re-listening to episode 1, it's amazing how many future episode ideas we laid out. And we also start talking like opening cards and filming it and stuff. That was still new. Jeff still wasn't on a regular basis. So that's fun. And by the way, I'm going to bring an argument out of left field you didn't see coming, Jeff, which is on a pedantic point in the very first episode of the show, in the intro, I call this Jeff's show. So yeah, despite the fact that this did start as a Patreon-produced show, and the way Jeff both frames it over at Patreon and even said on that episode that, you know, if you sponsor the show, it's your show. You do with it what you want. I'm going to argue that you can say this is a joint show. And the only reason I bring that up is because on the end of year Jeff Has Cool Friends show, Jeff makes a reference to that about whose show it is and ownership, etc. I'm going to say right from the get, Jeff, we say it's our show. And again, if you go listen to that episode, it's remarkable how many future episode ideas we're plugging and bringing. And I didn't even know at that time if it was just going to be a one-off or a couple of months. So the fact that we've been doing this for over 2 years now is great. All right. So I'm going to bring the debate question I had ready to go. Jeff doesn't bite. Honestly, I'm not sure if I can agree to it, but I got to keep bringing this up because I put so much thought into it. And the reason is, in old school video games, there is a concept of a glitch, namely, do you do something illegal in the game? And that does affect things like the legality of speedrun. So there is a question on in Zelda 2, if you use the fairy spell, which turns Link into a very tiny fairy, and he is able to go through doors in dungeons. The question is this intentional? Like, is this allowed? Or is this a glitch? So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I have a very sound headcanon argument as to why it isn't a glitch. Jeff doesn't bite, but I'm going to let you listen to that clip and you tell me.
I've watched speedruns out of curiosity. I remember my friends and I used to do like little speedrun challenges of Super Mario Brothers because I had my NES in college. I brought it with me, and we were already a few generations past the NES, but it was so great. And I think we had gotten it into like the 6-minute range. Like that's around where we would beat Super Mario Brothers in about 6 minutes.
Oh, because you can do the double warp. So you can warp, you get the warp in the first level and then you get the second warp. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I remember I watched a speed run like the other day, and it was like half that And I was like, what the, and it was showing all these like little glitch moves and people walking through the walls and figuring it out. And I was like, oh, this is just like a totally different world that I'm not going to try to figure out here.
Yeah, it's breaking the matrix, which is, because it's what you, and that's the thing is, what is really fun to realize about old video games is exactly that, is that they kind of have to cheat because they don't, like, your modern web browser that you and I are both using has so much memory, so much power for any developer to use. Those old games do not have that. So they have to do like little hacks and cheats. And so they're not even like checking, like various games like Super Mario, like Legend of Zelda, like Mega Man, they don't actually check for all the stuff you think they're checking. And so if you hack around it, you can like teleport through walls and stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. To me, and I know that's stupid, but I'm like, I'm watching it and be like, that's cheating. And it's like, kind of, yeah. Like,
all right,
what?
Jeff, I didn't think I was going to get a chance to get this in, but I'm going to throw this to you because in these speed runs, there are things called like glitchless runs. Exactly what you're saying. They're saying you cannot abuse a glitch to beat the game. So can you beat the game clean or with a glitch? I told you about the fairy spell, which is you can go through any door in the game as a fairy. You could argue that's a glitch. Now I have a very nerd canon thing in my head I came up with for this. So I'm going to let Jeff be the judge rule on this. My argument is the doors in Zelda 2 are not real doors like we think of, like with a key, even though you use a key.
I mean, are you sure about that?
Well, why not just, okay, I think I'm going to lose, but I'll still go for it. Call bullshit on me at the end of this, Jeff, and we'll edit that out, right? That's what we do. You can go through the door and use a key, but I argue it's a spell. So I argue that each door in the game is a spell, that the key is like an artifact that takes the spell off. That's why the master key works. It can take the spell off any door. So it is not a glitch to go through the door as the fairy. You're going through the keyhole because you're small enough. The reason the door,
go ahead.
But the reason the door goes down, if you have, so here's the possible fly I didn't get to. If you are a fairy and you are holding a key when you go through a door, it uses the key. But my argument is that's because it's a spell. It can detect the key. It uses it as a spell. It decasts the door, but it's not a glitch to go through the door as a fairy because you're just small enough to fit through the hole.
I mean, that's fair enough, I guess.
So if I was on bullshit, I got asked that. If I was on bullshit and I had to like sell that to you and I just did what I did, is Jeff calling bullshit or is Jeff letting it go?
I'd call bullshit mainly because I'd be like, doors aren't spells. There's a reason there's a key there.
Yeah, like turtles don't fall on people's head, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's also a video game. No, like I guess so. I get that. It's fiction.
All right, another follow-up argument we have in this episode where I kind of capitulate, but I don't think in hindsight I agree, is does Zelda need saving? All right, let's give you a little bit of Zelda 2 backstory because it is a wild game. In Zelda 2, Link is trying to rescue Zelda, but it is not the Zelda you rescued in the first Adventures of Zelda. It is actually her great, I don't know the specifics you would say, aunt from back in the day, the first Zelda. And what happened is, in the original Legend of Zelda game, there are just two Triforces. There's the Triforce of Power and the Triforce of Wisdom. Zelda has the Triforce of Wisdom. Ganon has the Triforce of Power. Ganon is trying to steal the Triforce of Wisdom from Zelda and take over the game. But it turns out the Triforce actually turns into a Sierpinski triangle. It's a fractal because there is also a Triforce of Courage. And the backstory we're given is the original Zelda and her brother. Their father had all three Triforces, Power, Wisdom, Courage. And he didn't want them to fall into the wrong hands, so he split them up and only told Zelda, the original Zelda where the Triforce of Courage was. Her brother tried to have an evil magician get her to tell him where it was, and instead he just put her into a deep coma. So she has been in a coma this entire time, and only like the true chosen one, which happens to be Link, is able to save her, and he needs to go find the Triforce of Courage to reawaken. So the Zelda from the very first Zelda game is not present in this game. And additionally, Link is trying to run away from Ganon's minions because they know if they kill him, they can use his ashes to resurrect Ganon. So where this gets absolutely hilarious is you are trying to rescue Zelda, but it's not the Zelda from the first game. Arguably, she doesn't need saving because she's been in a coma all this time and still is. And Link is putting himself in major danger to do it. And Jeff and I bandy back and forth about, like, does she need saving? Could you in good faith make a commercial about needing to save Zelda in this game? I argue no. Jeff argues yes. I'll play that and you tell me what you think.
So here's what's fascinating. Both the Wizard and the US marketing, when you're talking concessions to the United States, that horrible romantic interest scene you talk, he actually mentions Zelda. And he says, Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, which again, he gets it wrong. And he says, Link has to find Zelda. And again, completely wrong. Doesn't make any, that's not the game. And Jenny Lewis actually calls him up and then they kiss. It doesn't make any sense, but still. But then, advertising expert, I'm curious if you've seen these ones. The Zelda 2 commercial in the United States. You brought up the Japanese one, which makes a ton of sense. It follows the game's plot. Girl goes into a game store. She's got a Triforce logo. Guy opens a chasm. Hey, you get to go play Zelda 2 because you're the chosen one, just like in the game. She's dressed up like Link with the hat and goes off and adventures. It's like, that's the game. The United States has a guy with a mullet. Like, Zelda's supposed to be like a small 16-year-old elf-like guy with a hat.
It's a 22-year-old Link.
It's a 22-year-old, no hat, with a mullet, and he's just running around yelling Zelda. And then even at one,
it's funny because it's really all about the narration. I actually don't hate the commercial. But it does show, because when you wrote, like, you wanted to talk about the difference in the dichotomy of the two commercials, in Japan, it was you get to play the game. And in America, it was like you get to be the game. That was how I was viewing that, where it was a much more immersive experience of showing the actual guy running around in a dungeon, like kind of furiously sprinting, trying to figure out what he's doing.
And he actually shows up. I think Link to the Past, the same person shows up again. But it's also, what I'll give, this is very American. So the game's delayed a year. The Wizard has full access to the game. The United States film producers of commercials have full access to the game. They're like, you know what this game's about, right? You know, like a little tiny guy with a green hat trying to, find the Triforce of Courage. They're like, got it. Like, what did you get? They're like, oh yeah, Zelda's, Link's trying to save Zelda with a mullet. And you're like, that is not what we asked for. But
but it's kind of indirectly he's trying to save Zelda. He's trying to save her life by doing the task at hand. He's not trying to rescue her from jail.
She's not in any danger. She's been in that thing the whole time. She's,
Yeah, but you wouldn't say that Sleeping Beauty isn't in need of rescue because she's sleeping. She still needs to be saved.
Yeah, but okay,
like in the coma, like she's in a coma. She's not in immediate danger, but that doesn't mean that she should be forgotten and not saved. The whole point of the quest is, in a way, to save her indirectly by going through these tasks and making sure the resurrection of Ganon doesn't happen.
All right. Well, again, the resurrection of Ganon is unrelated, which is the funny part of the game. Sure. But I'll give it to you. Yeah, there's a reason you did good on a game show where you had to talk yourself through stuff.
All right. As mentioned, it was a ton of fun to look back just at the first episode and see where the show has gotten to and where it started. And as an example, the show now has producers. If you head on over to patreon.com/Jeff May, you can produce shows like Jeff Has Cool Friends. You can get stuff sent to you in the mail from Jeff Has Cool Cards. Just, and keep the lights on. And we've got a set of producers, and I'm going to read them to you in no particular order. So we have the Enchanted Wandering Unpierced Left Nipple Cider served at room temperature. I love that. All right, we've got drinkwithmikeslater.com. Every time Drake plugs the back catalog, Mike, I don't know what to do with this episode. Like, this episode is just made to kill you of alcohol poisoning. That's the case. We have Jeff has a 12-inch Tick action figure. We have, hey, Jeff here. Let me introduce the producer names real quick to say the only thing I love more than a hot, steamy bowl of mashed potatoes is a soggy-ass brioche bun to dip it in. Thanks, guys. I've been making it a shtick that I incorrectly read that one, so I really loved it. I'm just myself. We have star of season 9, Porcelain Jesus. We've got Ricky Cilantro. We have Norm from Cheers. We have Burrito, who I'm going to rename to Kung Fu Burrito. We've got Dan Hackroyd. We've got Bobby Opulent. We've got El Celdo says, organize and fight. No one will give you what you need by asking nicely. As a funny note, El Celdo, Jeff brought this up too, but I want to give you extra shout outs, which is El Celdo signed up at this Patreon tier, and with apologies in December, we did not read your name as a producer. So sorry. And what I will say to people like that, if you are a Patreon subscriber at various places, whenever someone screws up, the life hack, and it's not really much of a hack, is go to the actual show, tell the person, and if they're a cool person like Jeff, they will feel so bad, they'll give you bonus stuff. They'll give you bonus accolades. So we'll say El Celdo 3 times, and hopefully this isn't a Candyman situation. Hopefully, El Celdo, you don't show up in the mirror and do something dangerous. But anyway, thank you so much, El Celdo. We have Bimmy and Jimmy out fighting crime. And finally, we have, I'm going to start calling Yoda Old Grogu just to see what happens. A fun note that I brought up before is, obviously Old Grogu, Baby Yoda, there are rules by Disney that you have to call him Grogu, not Baby Yoda. And my son, I actually did show a lot of Yoda clips when he was younger. And I tried saying, hey, that's Grogu. And he's like, no, it's not Grogu, it's Baby Yoda. So according to my son, at least, you do not call Grogu Grogu, it's Baby. All right, back to the arguments. Let's get to number 1, searching for Bobby Fischer, a.k.a. Dre doesn't know about Saved by the Bell. Most of our arguments are going to fall into this category, which is basically Jeff and me remembering a fact or detail of movie or pop culture, and in real time not knowing who's right and kind of like bandying back and forth for a little bit. And I think it's so funny. I love leaving it in the show. So at the end of the movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer, they give an epilogue of how Bobby Fischer, the chess player, comes out of retirement to defeat Boris Spassky in a rematch. And if we hadn't gone down this rabbit hole, I likely would have compared this to Mickey Rourke and The Wrestler, as in basically Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky are 2 former greats, but it's not them in their prime, and they're just competing for a payday, very much like Mickey Rourke's character does in The Wrestler. And I might have also just given some shout-outs to how Boris Spassky was a real class act in that he let Bobby Fischer compete in the world title match. It was really within his purview because Bobby Fischer was a real asshole, which we discussed in the episode. It would have been well within Boris Spassky's rights to just say, Bobby Fischer, you are acting incredibly unsportsmanlike and terrible. You get to go home. You get forfeited. He did not do that. As a result, we get some of the most amazing chess games in world history, but I have mixed feelings on Bobby Fischer. Again, go listen to that episode. However, instead of talking chess more, because we've got like over 90 minutes of chess in that episode, we wind up talking Saved by the Bell. A note for future us, by the way, Jeff, we're definitely going to have to do something Saved by the Bell related at some point. We're going to give an end, like, little placard that says Bobby Fischer came back and defended his title in 92.
Bobby Fischer, he played Spassky, right?
Yes, in 72 and in 92. And here's another wrestling.
Good for me for that.
Yeah.
Do you want to know how I remember that name?
Because the placard was in the movie you just watched?
No. Saved by the Bell.
Oh, yeah. That's
on
a
the
much
chess
better
episode where he goes, I make Spassky Bishop look. He's like, how do you know Spassky Bishop look? He is my uncle.
That's an amazing. And that episode's funny because we also discover in that episode of Saved by the Bell that Zach Morris is a chess prodigy that then, like, that just comes out of nowhere and nobody knows
Zach
what's
is
going
a chess prodigy? No, he's
so,
not.
okay, full story. Screech is supposed to play Boris Spassky's nephew at chess. Zach, of course, gets everybody to bet on the game. But then the other team, I forget what they were called.
Valley, which is, by the way, now that I live in the Valley and I know the people that live by the Bay, Bayside should not have been the heroes. But that's
very much just like this movie.
Real class war there. The rich kids get that's basically like living in the Pacific Palisades is where they were. But regardless,
I'm going to finish. So they steal Screech's lucky beret.
Violet Vickers.
So he agrees to, he doesn't know what to do. He thinks he's going to lose because he's unlucky. They kidnap Spassky's nephew. Zach starts playing as him and is beating Screech and then resigns.
No, he's not. He's beating
him. He's beating
No, he's not. He does a checkers move. He does a checkers multi-jump and then just he puts going, he's too good. He's too good. You don't want to go up against me.
I thought okay.
No, he does a checker multi-jump and Screech goes, wow, you're good, because he didn't know you could even do that. Like, that's the bit. The bit is that he's not playing chess, he's playing checkers.
All right, I just got schooled on Saved by the Bell. But then
that I will know. You know more about chess, but I know more about Saved by the Bell.
Which is embarrassing because I've watched a fair amount of Saved by the Bell. So this is Jeff is 100% right here, and younger me just like misread the dialogue. I remember this from like probably middle school, high school. So for those that don't remember the episode, for those that don't fully remember the episode, as I kind of mentioned on the Zach Morris is in disguise as Boris Spassky's nephew and is intentionally trying to lose to Screech, but Screech is too oblivious to it. So at no point was Zach winning at chess. He didn't know the rules. So he was trying to play checkers, and Screech is just baffled. And actually at the end of the scene, Zach starts whispering to Screech, just win the game, and actually just resigns on his own because Screech doesn't know what's going on. That was the classic Zach Screech dynamic. Screech being too much of a spaz to realize what was going on. Spassky's nephew does come out, and Screech then does plan to defeat him. I will give some notes. Just like the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, they play way too fast for this to be a competitive game, and there is no world where a part-time chess player like Screech in the show would have been able to defeat a top candidate in the Russian School of Chess in the 90s. This actually backs up the theory that Saved by the Bell in California is all a figment of Zach Morris's mind, as he's actually daydreaming it while he's in class taught by Haley Mills in Indiana. Again, we're going to have to revisit Saved by the Bell one of these days. All right, number 3, Dutch angle is what I call this one. It's clever. You'll see why in a second. This one's fun because it kind of shows me and Jeff's personality when you listen to how we kind of start arguing back and forth on who's right. We had both watched the movie Dutch multiple times to record this podcast episode. That's the 1991 or 92 movie starring Ethan Embry, Ed O'Neill, and one of the only flops in John Hughes' resume, which is just kind of wild. And there's a scene in the movie that really does sum up kind of the vibe of the movie because it's a really serious scene that still has some slapsticky moments. And Ed O'Neill and Ethan Embry are in a homeless shelter, sleeping on cots, trying to kind of talk. And Ed O'Neill's cot keeps making loud noises and breaking and getting everybody upset. And they wind up switching cots in a homeless shelter. And Jeff and I argue, do they actually switch cots? So I'll let you listen to the clip and be right back at it. They wind up in a group sleeping situation. So everybody's just on cots in essentially a gymnasium. We get some level of humor, which is
Dutch can't get the cot to lock in, so he keeps falling down and shit.
Yeah, he's on a cot that because they're locked cots. So this one is either busted or he's too heavy, and it keeps falling over and waking people up, and they're saying shh. And then at one point he switches with Doyle, and they're doing that. And at this point we get Doyle.
He doesn't switch with Doyle, does he?
He does. Yeah,
he stays on the ground.
So no, he switches with Doyle after it falls. It falls once. He tries to fix it. It falls a second time. He tells Doyle to switch with him. They switch cots.
No,
and
they
the
don't
scene
switch.
ends. They switch.
Are you sure? Are you 100% sure they switched, Dre?
I would say 70% willing to put money on it. $20 each or whatever.
I just watched it, and he's there. It falls down, and then finally it just falls down to the ground flat, and he just goes, ugh. And then that's the end of the scene.
Well, that's the last one. I thought he says switch with him in the middle of the scene because he doesn't switch.
He says switch with me, and he goes, why? He goes,
15,000.
Yeah, you're a lot less. You weigh less than me. And then by the time then it just falls again, and it's a thing. But no, they do not switch.
So he attempts
you were
to try.
so confident that they switched.
I gave you 70%, as in I would have put $20 and 70% odds there. I was not going to do 100%. I'm not that silly. All right, so here's the fun news. I actually win this one, and I've been ruminating on doing a video or something on it. I'm honestly just hampered by the fact that so many modern streaming services, I'm on a Mac computer, intentionally block it out. So I'm just going to have to figure out the software setup or, DVDs or something. I just haven't had time to do that, but someday. So I actually, did rewatch this. And the reason the scene is confusing is in the original scene, in terms of how they're placed, they do switch sides, but the next scene, they also switch the angle. So in terms of side of the screen the actors are on, they stay on the same side of the screen. But in terms of actual logistic placement in their cots, they do switch. I was right, and my bet would have paid off. All right, let's get to number 4 and number 5, both of which come from Have Yourself a Morlock Little Christmas. In terms of the bottle episode clip show shtick gimmick that we're going for, I'm actually going to use 2 clips from our most recent episode. And to be fair, kind of the reason this happened is actually in real time. If you go listen to the X-Men bonus episode, that's only to patrons, by the way. So if you are on the free feed, you have to sign up for the Patreon account or wait a year to actually hear this episode. So in some ways, this is a taste for the free fun.
in real time in that episode, I'm talking about how much I love when Jeff and me argue and wanting to make it clips and wanting to make it content. And so I'm basically creating the show that I'm doing now then. So let's talk about it. So the very first argument we come up with is, what is the beast cooking? So I'm going to play the clip and then I'll give us our answer. All right. This next scene, by the way, is probably the least. Let's get to that. I'm gonna move us along to get to that.
Beast is making a cranberry glaze, but
Okay. No, Jeff. I'm gonna do the in depth. This is Christmas dinner to me. So I'm gonna do the in depth because I did watch this. Beast is making an ale of some sort. He says it's not. No. Jeff, by the way, this may be a theme in the future.
We're going to argue about this because I double checked it and you are
right.
wrong
It's a
in saying that
cranberry
he's making
glaze
an ale.
eventually. No, he says he's making a beverage of some sort that's non-alcoholic initially that turns green. It happens. Check it. Later, he makes a cranberry glaze, but initially he says he's making a non-alcoholic thing to drink. That's what he says.
You're misinterpreting what he's saying.
You're going to watch. Okay.
Dre,
so
you're misinterpreting what's happening. He's reciting a poem about ale, about making ale. So he's reciting a poem. Now his cranberry glaze that he's making is non-alcoholic because it's not ale, but he says he's hoping that he's doing the poem justice. So he's using a poem about making ale because there's no poems about making cranberry glaze, but he can't do that in the cartoon. So he's making a cranberry glaze.
So by the way, Jeff, the reason I'm smiling is it's a back burner thing that may never happen, but you and me arguing scenes, I think you're up 2-1 now, where one of us is right or one of us is wrong, is something I actually want to make a nerd segment at some point.
Fucking do it.
And at some point in the future,
right now.
I think you're right, and we're going to have to, and I'm excited. That's why I'm smiling. I'm like, again, this is how I'm broken, Jeff, because I'm enjoying that thing. And this, I'm like, look at how terrible this episode is, Jeff. Isn't it great? And you're like, what is the matter with you? And I'm like, look at how wrong I am, Jeff. I get to make content. Isn't that great? And you're like, what is wrong with you? Okay. Yeah. Beast is making a cranberry glaze. You are right about that. I have no idea because it turns green at some point.
I think that's an inconsistency in the animation, if I'm being 100% honest.
Probably true. Here's the rough news. In no uncertain terms, Jeff is equivocally the undisputed winner of this argument. Beast is actually reading a poem by Sir Walter Scott. It is called Christmas in the Olden Time. I'm going to read the last couple of lines quick, reciting what Beast says and explain it. So he says, "'Twas Christmas broached the mightiest ale, 'twas Christmas told the merriest tale, Christmas gamble oft would cheer a poor man's heart through half the year." All right. So what really got me, though, is two things. Beast does refer to his cranberry glaze as a brew. The line he actually says is, "Though non-alcoholic, a Yuletide brew worthy of Sir Walter's verse." So that's what got me. He calls it a brew. The second thing that got me that we do discuss in the episode is the brew, the cranberry glaze, is green in that scene, but when they come into the lab, it is red. So I had assumed he was cooking something else. But in rewatching the episode to settle this argument, you can actually see there is no conceivable way. It all happens in like essentially one shot. So we know for a fact he was cooking the cranberry glaze that explodes. It's probably just a miscoloring, or it turned red after it exploded. So Jeff is right here. Now, the other fun thing, and I'll play the clip of it after, is in the same episode, we wind up arguing about the order of episodes in Batman, the animated series, where I'm just going to give it away because we say it on the show. I remember correctly that the Red Claw episode was the premiere episode, and Jeff remembers it as On Leather Wings, which is the first episode by number. And like if you go to a streaming service, the first one that will play, I have the DVDs as well, and it's the first one on the DVD. We resolved that in real time, but I'm going to play that clip so you can hear that quote-unquote argument and then give some commentary on the argument. I tried to do the VCR, set it to auto record because I think the first Batman episode aired at night, like it aired prime time, and we had a power outage. So I did not get to see the first episode with the Red Claw rights, which is an amazing episode, and they used her one more time.
Wait, the first Batman the Animated Series episode?
Yeah, the first episode that aired. No, that's the first listed episode. The first aired episode was the Red Claw.
No, the first episode I saw was Man Bat on the first. It was
I'm fairly certain they did the Red Claw episode during prime time at night. Logan, if you are listening along to the show or in the chat anywhere, feel free to let us know. Jeff, we're piecing out, talking about the X-Men, even though we got one more scene to look this up. I think I'm right, but we'll see. Anyway, because I believe they did do the two-parter Red Claw
it aired
episode.
September 6th, 1992 was On Leather Wings.
We are going to, I'm not going to stop
You
digging
don't
at this.
argue. Why do you argue with me about these things, Dre? That would be like me arguing with you about like computer shit. I would never fucking do that.
But I know this stuff too. It's like, even though
not
I
enough.
will say you are the better fighter, no doubt, it's still that thing. And by the way, randomly staying topical with one of your other great shows, because we're close to plugs. This is an official plug. But if you listen to the Ugg Fine show, Ugg Fine, we have a podcast with Kim and Jeff, because you always put your name second. One of the random topics you bring up a lot is like ADHD. And one of these weird things that comes up, because, you know, a lot of people listening to that show are maybe like, huh, this thing sounds familiar. Is people with ADHD sometimes to get that dopamine fix, just fighting randomly. And I'm like, oh, that's, huh.
Yeah. So
when you hear that, I was just like, oh, but let's get the last scene.
Anyway, real quick, you're so like, what? I don't know. Although, what's this now? It says production order number 1, September 6, 1992. But then it says broadcast order episode 2. You know what?
Oh, do we get a split decision? Because you were right on Cranberry.
13th episode of the first season. It's first of a 2-part episode. It marks the show's debut. The 4th level is based on the... remember seeing On Leather Wings being the premiere. What they might have done,
it might have been the premiere. It might have been the premiere afternoon show, and then I think they did, because I mean, I remember they did. I think they did like prime time for the initial premiere, which was the Red Claw episode. So
okay, you know what? I apologize. I'm wrong, Dre.
Yes,
I'm wrong. Even though I do not recall that being what it was aired in that order. I remember seeing the On Leather Wings.
No, but like I said, here's the justification.
Anyway.
They a few times with Batman the Animated Series, at least as I remember, they would do primetime spots. So like the episode where we find out Dick Grayson's origin was like aired at night, and that was a 2-parter. And the Red Claw episode was aired at night, and then but the afternoon airing might have been different. So it might have been your parents or you didn't see the evening show, or maybe your like local area didn't have it showing, and then you saw the first afternoon one. All right. So in that argument, Jeff actually says, Dre, why do you argue? And the answer is, sometimes I'm right, like I am in that show, and the elation I get from that can fuel me for such a long time. This is a mean trick. As while I was researching this episode, Jeff says that Jubilee says that she's going to buy Christmas dinner as her gifts. And she does kind of have a line to it, but that's not exactly what happens. Jubilee goes shopping. When they are finishing shopping, Jubilee says, do I need to buy anything else? Should I buy anything for dinner? However, again, if we watch the full stream of events, there is no case where she would have had time for that. But then later in the episode, Jubilee does in fact say that half of her gifts are food. So I've got a weird tangent to go on this about that, which is namely to say, in this episode, I actually mentioned David Bell, who, outside of being a fantastic podcaster over at Gamefully Unemployed, is an acclaimed scriptwriter over at, say, The Blacklist, where some of his scripts have just got, off-the-top reviews. And I note in the actual X-Men episode that David Bell and myself will sometimes try and do the work for Bad Movies or episode, which is, we'll try and make them make sense. We'll try and explain it. We'll say maybe we're missing this or this thing, as opposed to just saying, well, maybe it's a bad episode, maybe it wasn't well written. And I'm actually equating this to chess grandmasters and their understanding of structures. The reason things like X-Men the Animated Series and Saved by the Bell are so easy for me and Jeff to argue or disagree on is because they're not well structured, they're not well put together. And the way this worked, they did a study on chess grandmasters on their memory. And it turns out that chess grandmasters have a phenomenal memory for chess position. But the kicker was, it has to be a legal position. Namely, the position on the board for a chess grandmaster to be able to memorize it quickly has to be a position you could legally hit. And that relates to chess, because chess grandmasters spend years studying openings. That's like the first couple moves of the game. You're studying position. The second you put in a legal position on the board, namely if you just throw the pieces on randomly, chess grandmasters' memory vanish. So for people like Dave, for people like Jeff, for people, yes, sure, I'll put myself in there too, when we watch a good piece of pop culture, we can remember the good ones because it all fits, it all flows. When we watch a bad one where it's kind of slapdash, all thrown together, our own brains start failing us because, like for myself at least, I'm trying to put the episode together to make sense. I even have a theory on that X-Men animated series, the Have Yourself a Very More Like Christmas episode that might be future content as well, but it is just a bad episode. And anyway, other random just callback earlier on, Dustin Diamond, the actor who played Screech, I apocryphally remember him commenting on that episode with the chess grandmaster with Spassky's nephew in it, that he was upset because one of the scenes had the chess position like set up incorrectly. It may have even been with him holding a box of like Screechios or something. I do not have that episode readily available on streaming, and I have done enough research for this time-saving clip episode, so I'm not, but that does tie everything together. So indeed, if there are any other arguments you can think of on the Nerd Show, if there's any other content you would like, we are really hoping that 2025 can be, nice to Jeff, can let him off the mat. If you haven't listened to the Nerd Backlog, if you're new, hopefully I, gave you a taste of some of the old stuff to definitely want to listen to. I'll shout it out one more time, patreon.com/Jeff May if you just want to keep helping. Because, it is a really tough time for creators out in the Los Angeles area right now. You can find me most places at Nerd Numbers. I can't wait for next month's episode of Nerd, where we're going to discuss comics. In fact, one of my favorite ones.
And as one last clip, again, this is from the bonus episode of Have Yourself a Morlock Little Christmas, which if you are not at patreon.com/Jeff May, you have to wait till next year to listen to the whole episode. I will play the food clip that I just discussed. Thanks so much. We'll see you next month. Jubilee wants to buy really nice presents for everybody.
And what the present is makes no sense.
Well, we'll get there. When they're at the place, she is holding presents as high as her, saying, I'm so excited to finally be able to buy my family really nice stuff. A woman with perfume comes up to Wolverine and I thought she was murdering him because it's this giant.
Oh, like a North Korean dictator.
Yeah, she just, this huge puff up, because that's what moves us to the next scene. This random person in the shop they're at blows perfume in Wolverine's face and says it makes the women go wild.
Big 90s. That's a big 90s bit, is a perfume or a cologne salesman just coming and spraying you.
And Wolverine, that says it'll turn the women into animals. Wolverine says, better stop or I'm going to be an animal. And they just leave the store. Next scene, this scene is wild.
Well, you skipped to what is the presents though? That we got.
We'll find late.
No, she brings it up in the beginning when she's, I don't know what to get anybody. And she's, I know, I'll buy the food for the Christmas dinner.
Oh, she does actually say that early in the episode. So you watch,
but
she brings that up later.
You're already making it.
Okay, I missed that line, so I'm glad you caught that, Jeff. She will reference it later in the episode.
She does, it's Chekhov's Christmas dinner food.
But not quite, because we'll get to that scene. Then Storm apologizes, and she's like, maybe I was a little harsh. This is the utter insane part. It's a little less insane with how you explained it. But then they're like, hey, why don't we stay for food?
She does apologize for triggering Logan, which I think that's one of the only things where I'm like, this doesn't belong in this. Where she has a moment where I'm sorry I triggered you by making you do that when clearly you've got something going on about it. I found that to be weird that she's just apologizing.
It wasn't even a real apology. She's just, I should have been a little more sympathetic to you before I demanded you give an experimental blood transfusion to a kid that might kill him.
Yeah.
And he's cool. Then they're like, hey, let's stay for food. And Jubilee, to what you were saying, says, wait, half of these gifts are food, right? So then she tells the two kids, Leech and Mariana, and Leech is apparently just fine, right? But it's
I'm better because I got Wolverine blood going through me.
Which is awesome.
Now I can smell all the shit in the sewer that I live in.
Oh, it's the worst. So they go rush to open up the gifts. Now the animation has the first couple of gifts as kids' toys.
Yeah.
Even though
shrimp that's been sitting in the sewer for a while.
I don't know if we even see that. We just see a plane or whatever for the kids to have toys. We were told they were food.
And then we're Morlocks to eat Matchbox cars.
But then I'm like, well, who did Jubilee get that? Who did she get a kid's plane for? I don't know. This makes no sense.
Thanks for listening to Nerd. If you want to help keep the podcast growing, it's definitely worth your while to head over to patreon.com/Jeff May. Also, you'll get early access to cool stuff. Cool stuff like videos of Jeff showing off awesome collectibles and doing pack break videos. It'd be worth your while to check out Jeff May's YouTube channels. That's right, channels. For pack breaking by Jeff and myself, head over to youtube.com/JeffHasCoolCards, where Jeff breaks packs weekly, opens stuff you send him in the mail, and sometimes even gives away cool prizes. For Jeff's podcasts, head over to youtube.com/@HeyThereJeffro. That's spelled JEFFRO. And shocker, that is also his Twitter, Instagram, and any other social media accounts as well. So follow Jeff everywhere. You can find me most places on the internet as @NerdNumbers. Also, shout out to Chris Haugen for the outro theme of Pure Magic. Thanks so much, and we'll be back with another nerdy subject soon.